Hello, folks, and welcome to Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone, and our topic for this stream is AIPAC, the American Israel Political Action Committee, is still after Summer Lee, candidate for Congress in the Pennsylvania 12th, if I recall correctly. Summer won her primary in spite of huge expenditures from AIPAC, its associated super PAC, and other super PACs that came close to defeating her, but they did not succeed because of her strong ground game, successful fundraising, and connections in the community over a period of years. So, in spite of a formidable amount of funds invested in that campaign, the oligarchs were not able to defeat Summer Lee. Now, you know, of course, that there are many streams, in this series that are concerned with the work of oligarchs trying to defeat the popular will with money, with advertising, with distortions, with lies, and with political activity that has no justification except for the money devoted to it. That's the unfortunate truth. Hey, Mark Collins, how are you? Hey, it's nice to see you, Mark. Okay, so AIPAC beat Nina in Ohio too. They suck. You're right. They certainly do suck. Okay, so we're very concerned about this, of course, because our democracy is being defeated by big money. The oligarchy won quite a few primary elections this year, at least 4 or 5, by spending big money in the primaries. Much of the money came from Republican sources, not from Democratic sources, because the Republican oligarchs involved filtered their money, but through super PACs. And so it wasn't easy to find out or to be highly visible at the start that, of course, it was visible there was big money coming into these campaigns. But until the super PACs actually sent in their reports, it wasn't clear that a lot of this money was coming from Republican sources, well-known Republican funders. So the way Republicans are participating in primaries, even in closed primaries, the Democratic Party, is by giving big money. And let's take a look at the latest efforts to do that thing, to defeat a popular progressive Democratic candidate through the use, of big money. And I'm going to share the screen. And we'll go to an article that appeared in Common Dreams. The headline of that article is AIPAC Super PAC throws in against uh, the progressive Democrat Summer Lee. This is from Jake Johnson. It was yesterday. Having tried and failed to prevent Summer Lee from winning the Democratic nomination for the open U.S. House seat in Pennsylvania's 12th congressional district earlier this year, a super PAC formed by the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, AIPAC, is now spending against the progressive candidate in her race against Republican Mike Doyle. According to new federal filings, the United Democracy Project, which is a super PAC that was formed out of AIPAC, has dropped nearly $80,000 on mailers opposing Lee, who overcame millions in UDP spending to win the district's May primary over corporate lawyer Steve Irwin. During that race, the UDP, which is funded by prominent Republican billionaires, such as, for example, Sheldon Adelson, attempted to cast Lee as insufficiently loyal to the Democratic Party. In one ad, AIPAC's group, Republican billionaires, accusing Lee as being insufficiently loyal to the Democratic Party. In one ad, AIPAC's group slammed Lee for, quote, fighting Democrats, unquote, pointing to her past criticism of the party's leadership and direction. So now you can't be a Democrat, you can't be in the party and be loyal to the party because you're criticizing the party's leadership and the party's direction. What kind of democracy is that? These political parties are supposed to be open parties. You could join them, you can do things for the party, and those things can include criticism of the party's leadership and the party's direction. Not just past criticism, but current criticism as well. If a party is a Democratic Party, small d Democratic Party, it's got to have a place for criticism, or it can't adapt to change. It's no accident that the current party of Democrats seems unable to adapt to change because it doesn't take kindly to criticism of the leadership and direction of the party in the first place. But UDP's campaign to ensure Lee's defeat to a Republican in the general election further exposes its primary attacks as cynical and hypocritical. Don't forget hypocritical. As Haaretz reported on Monday, UDP's general election intervention represents the group's, quote, first ever spend in a Democrat versus Republican election battle, unquote. Quote, UDP came under significant scrutiny during the primary cycle for its tactics, all while being significantly bankrolled by gifts from Republican mega donors, the newspaper observed. That's the leading newspaper in Israel, Haaretz. Quote again, it spent a total of $26.2 million exclusively on Democratic primaries, with $10.5 million funding attack ads in the 9 races in which it directly involved itself, making UDP the greatest spenders this cycle, unquote. Yusama Andrebi, candidate communications director for Justice Democrats, wrote in response to news of UDP spending against Lee that it, quote, seems like AIPAC and the GOP have the same agenda, unquote. No kidding. And there's a tweet from Usama. AIPAC's first spend of the general election, and it's to be the Democrat at summer for PA, and elect an extremist, anti-choice Republican who wants to kick seniors off Social Security and Medicare. Seems like AIPAC and the GOP have the same agenda. Sure does. And a tweet from Ben Samuels at B Samuels. AIPAC Super PAC's first spend in a D versus R race in the general midterm elections. Only fitting it's against Summer Lee, the first progressive candidate it spent millions of dollars trying to defeat. Here's a recap of its political experiment in the primaries, and then there's a link to the Haaretz article. And UDP's general election spending was disclosed just over a week before the November 8th midterms, in which Democrats are looking to keep their majorities and expand their margins in the U.S. House and Senate. Axios reported Sunday that the National Republican Congressional Committee, the GOP's House campaign arm, is making a six-figure investment in Pennsylvania's 12th CD, an indication that the party sees the contest as winnable. The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee is also invested in the race, as has House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's PAC, though the latter has donated just $2,000 to Lee. Well, since Lee has said that she's going to join the squad, it's not surprising that Nancy Pelosi has been less than generous in donations from her PAC. Fueling Democrats' concerns about the contest is the peculiar fact that the GOP candidate has the same name as retiring 14-term Democratic Rep Mike Doyle, prompting some reports of voter confusion and accusations that the Republican Doyle is attempting to capitalize on possible mix-ups. Quote, they say, I'm not going to vote for Summer Lee because she's running against Mike Doyle, unquote, said Katie Forsyth, a member of Westmoreland County's Democratic Committee, relaying voter statements she's encountered while knocking on doors for Lee. Earlier this month, outgoing Democratic Rep Doyle announced his retirement for the second time in an effort to make clear that it's not him on the midterm ballot. So this is all, of course, incredibly shady, but I doubt that Summer Lee is going to lose. I think their $80,000 contribution is wasted. I think that Summer has raised plenty of money for the general. I think she's well funded from small dollar donations, and that she's going to beat the fake Mike Doyle decisively, in spite of the Republican attempts to sow confusion, and in spite of AIPAC's rather dishonest efforts to defeat someone they perceive as an enemy, specifically Summer Lee, of course. Now, when it comes to super PACs and their contributions, this is not all. I'm going to shift you over hang on a second. I'm going to make sure I shared this to my Facebook page, which is also the Facebook page for Embracing Democracy, of course. So, let me get that. There it is. So the second article I want you to see here is from Truthout. And the headline is 86% of GOP 2022 Senate race TV ad budget has come from dark money groups. Super PACs, 501c4s. It's by Sharon John on October 24th. Campaign spending from outside groups has hit a new high this election cycle, and a new analysis shows that Republicans running for key Senate seats have been a major beneficiary of this dark money infusion. So this shifts the focus from the House to the Senate. According to NPR, dark money groups have spent $1 billion on supporting Republican candidates this election cycle, with outside groups and campaigns spending over $1.6 million overall on Senate candidates in a dozen races. Analyzed by the publication, the vast majority of this money is being spent on battleground races in states like Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. This has been a huge boon to Republicans. The report finds that outside money has made up a staggering 86% of the GOP's TV ad budget so far, compared to 55% for Democrats. This is an indication that Republican candidates desperately need this dark money cash to be competitive, the analysis says, since outside groups are charged more to run ads than campaigns are. Quote, put simply, if it weren't for these outside groups, Republican candidates would be swamped on the airwaves, the report reads. Quote, the inability for Republican candidates to keep pace with Democrats has meant those GOP outside groups have had to make up a lot of ground, spending more for less, unquote. This spending comes as outside spending on elections is on the rise. According to Open Secrets, as of mid-October, outside spending hit $1.3 billion in this election cycle, a record high for a midterm election. And Republican groups are the biggest spenders, with the GOP's two largest congressional funds spending a collective $315 million with weeks to go until the election. By contrast, the Democrats' corresponding congressional funds have spent about $168 million so far, only a little over half of the Republican PAC's spending. So progressives and government watchdog groups have long maintained that dark money spending is a danger to U.S. democracy, thanks to the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United versus Federal Elections Commission in 2010. Dark money groups are able to spend unlimited amounts of money on elections, essentially only bound by the amount of money billionaires and corporations are willing to spend on influencing politics. Dark money groups aren't required to disclose their donors, meaning this political spending is often completely anonymous, thanks in part to Republicans who voted against a bill last month that would have required dark money groups to disclose the identities of those who give $10,000 or more. The battle over the Senate is key for both parties, uh, for both major parties this election. In order to win control of the Senate, uh, Republicans will need to pick up two more seats over the 50 seats they control, which they are not favored to do. Polls have found Democrats are slightly favored to win control of the Senate. Democrats have been aiming to add two seats to their Senate majority in order to circumvent the filibuster holdouts, Senators Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, to protect abortion and voting rights, okay, among other things. That's a bit of a scam because often the candidates who are running for the Senate seats are not particularly progressive. Some of them may well join Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, okay, in supporting the filibuster. Okay, it's not at all clear, for example, that Tim Ryan is going to protect abortion, okay, and voting rights, or is not going to support a carve out with respect to the filibuster to vote for these things. And that's true for some of the other Senate candidates as well. For example, if Manchin and Sinema happen to need some help to block a bill, it might be that Mark Kelly would be interested, okay, in joining them. He might suddenly find that the filibuster is so important that he's not about to vote for voting rights. I'm saying that the Democrats pay the rotating villains game, okay, as you know. They've been fortunate in that Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema are there to be the villains. But if there are more villains who are needed, but just remember that in the fight for 15 with respect to the American Rescue Plan, there were 8 Democrats who voted against the Sanders Amendment to restore the $15 an hour provision to the American Rescue Plan after that had been cut from the House bill when it hit the Senate by Chuck Schumer. So it's always possible that those other 6 senators who opposed the $15 an hour provision, that some more of them might join the Manchin, okay, and Sinema group. So this business of Democrats have been aiming to add 2 seats to their majority. We need to give them more than 2 seats to their majority. We maybe need to give them 5 seats added to their majority and no seats lost. And of course, there are a number of seats currently threatened, like, for example, Catherine Cortez Masto currently seems to be having a problem, okay, in the Nevada race. And her incumbency is threatened at this point. There's the threat to Warnock now, okay, in Georgia. Also, Mark Kelly has been getting weaker as that race, okay, has been going forward. Okay, so the Democrats not only have to hold but those seats, but even to gain the 2 seats They would have to win in Pennsylvania. They would have to win in Ohio. And to get more than the 2 seats, they would have to win in Iowa with Admiral Franken. They would have to win in North Carolina with Sherry Beasley. So anyway, even if they get 2 additional seats, don't be too sure they'll be able to accomplish what they're promising. Okay, let me take a look at some of your comments before we leave here. AIPAC beat me in Ohio. Steve Ghostart says good vibes. Kay says hi, Steve. And Steve Ghostart says, hey, Kay Ryan. I'd hope Mark Collins would make some comments since he hasn't been here for a very long time. But anyway, if you have any comments or questions, okay, if there are none, then please remember a few things. I have my Patreon account. That's up there, patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. I also have my Buy Me a Coffee account at www.buymeacoffee.com/Joe.Firestone. Okay. I have another stream that's coming on at 1:40. That stream is going to be about Biden, liquid natural gas, and the climate disaster. So that's going to be at 1:40. And I have a third stream coming up at 9 o'clock tonight called Lessons from Brazil. And there I'm going to cover a number of things. First of all, a great piece from Jeremy Corbyn. I'm going to cover the general political situation in Brazil. We know that Lula has won, of course, but we also know there are 2 months to sit around until he takes office, and who knows whether Bolsonaro is going to attempt a coup during that period of time, and whether the coup would be successful. There is a good analysis giving all the reasons why the coup will probably not be successful, and we'll be talking about that. And then we will also be talking about the general political structure of things in Brazil going forward. The right wing represented by Bolsonaro will have considerable strength because while he was in there, he created, an architecture. And it looks like if Lula is not able to deliver, that architecture might be strong for some time. Okay, so we're going to talk about that at 9 o'clock as well. Mark Collins says you are appreciated and doing a fine job. Well, thank you, Mark. I appreciate that. And Seth Rich, Steve Gostard says, hashtag Seth Rich did not kill himself. That's true. Hashtag leaked, not hacked. That's true. 66 years. What the fuck? And hashtag, well, he said WTF. And Steve says, hashtag free Assange. Well, thank you, Steve Gostard. I appreciate that. Okay, folks, I'm going to leave. I have 9 minutes to get to my other stream. Thank you for coming. Hopefully, I'll see you in 9 minutes.